There's a moment no one talks about when you think you're ready to buy a house in 2026. It's not excitement, it's hesitation. You're sitting at your desk, coffee going cold, staring at a listing that costs more than anything you've ever touched in your life. $500,000 for a house that looks fine, not special, just fine. You don't feel proud, you feel tense. You open a calculator, close it, open it again. You start subtracting expenses in your head before you even imagine furniture. Rent disappears, groceries stay, cars stay, life stays, and somehow the numbers don't bend. Everyone around you keeps saying, "This is what adulthood looks like now in 2026. Stretch a little, sacrifice a little, trust that it'll work out." But no one explains what a little actually costs over 30 years. So before you sign anything, before you let approval convince you that you're ready, there's one thing you need to do. Slow down and look at the math without flinching. In 2026, the number on the listing page is just an invitation, not the cost. $500,000 is where the conversation starts, not where it ends. But most people don't realize that until it's too late. The mistake begins with a simple assumption. If the house costs $500,000, then everything else must scale reasonably. It doesn't. Every extra dollar stacks quietly on top of the last one, turning a manageable idea into a heavy obligation. Start with the obvious. Even before you move in, you're expected to show up with cash, not symbolic money, real money. Tens of thousands of dollars that didn't appear just because your income went up on paper. Then the loan kicks in, and the monthly payment arrives like clockwork, indifferent to whether your life cooperates. But the mortgage is only the anchor. Property taxes don't care how stretched you already are. Insurance prices in 2026 reflect risk, weather, and chaos, not your budget. Maintenance waits patiently until the worst possible moment, then demands attention immediately. None of these costs ask for permission. They just show up. What makes this dangerous isn't that the expenses exist. It's that they're invisible when people make the decision. They're rarely mentioned in listings. They're minimized in conversations. They're brushed aside with phrases like, "You'll figure it out." But figuring it out means absorbing surprise after surprise with money you thought you had. The house doesn't just want your payment, it wants consistency, resilience, and spare capacity every single month. And most buyers in 2026 are already operating without much margin. That's where the trouble really begins. The most dangerous sentence in the home buying process is also the most reassuring. You're approved. It sounds like permission, it feels like validation, but approval doesn't mean safety. It just means the bank believes you can survive the loan barely. When lenders look at your finances, they're not asking whether you'll be comfortable. They're asking whether you can keep paying even when things get tight. Their math allows housing costs to take up close to 40% of your income before taxes. That number isn't designed for peace of mind. It's designed for risk tolerance. Let's simplify it. If your household brings in around $10,000 a month before taxes, the system says it's acceptable for nearly $4,000 of that to disappear into housing. On paper, that works. In real life, it leaves very little room for error. Because the bank doesn't subtract groceries, it doesn't subtract car repairs, it doesn't subtract medical bills, childcare, or the cost of being human. Approval assumes your income is stable, your expenses behave, and nothing important breaks. Anyone who has lived more than a few years knows that assumption doesn't hold. What makes this worse is how approval gets framed. It's treated like a finish line instead of a warning sign. Buyers hear yes and stop questioning the math. Agents celebrate it. Friends congratulate you. No one asks how the payments will feel 6 months in, once the excitement fades and the bills become routine. Affordability isn't about whether the loan goes through. It's about whether your life still fits around it. If the house becomes the center of every financial decision, that approval wasn't a green light. It was a pressure test, and you're the one expected to absorb the strain. The down payment is where optimism usually collapses. Not because people don't want to save, but because the gap between intention and reality is wider than anyone admits. On a $500,000 house, even a modest 10% means coming up with $50,000 in cash. That's not money you borrow. That's money you already have. For most households, that number doesn't sit in a savings account waiting to be used. It represents years of restraint, delayed plans, and saying no to things that were supposed to be part of life. So people look for ways around it. Smaller down payments, special programs, anything that lowers the bar enough to step over. And technically, those options work. You get the keys, you move in, the problem shows up afterward. When you put less down, the monthly cost quietly rises, not dramatically, just enough to matter. A few $100s here, a few hundred there. It doesn't feel dangerous at first because it's spread out, but over time, it tightens your budget in places you didn't expect. There's also the psychological cost no one talks about. When most of your savings vanish into the purchase, your safety net disappears with it. The house becomes both your biggest asset and your biggest vulnerability. Any surprise, a repair, a job change, a medical expense hits harder because there's nothing left to cushion it. The illusion is thinking the down payment is just a hurdle to clear. It's not. It's a trade. You're either paying upfront with cash you've worked years to build, or you're paying monthly with flexibility you'll wish you had later. Neither option is wrong. But pretending there's a painless version is how people end up trapped in homes that looked affordable only because the true cost was delayed. From the outside, a six-figure household income sounds like safety. It sounds like breathing room. It sounds like you've made it. But when that income meets a $500,000 house, the confidence fades faster than people expect. Take a household earning around $150,000 a year. Before taxes, that's roughly $12,500 a month. On paper, it looks solid. But after taxes, retirement contributions, and basic deductions, that number shrinks closer to $9,000. That's the real budget, the money that actually shows up. Now, layer in housing. A typical monthly cost for a home at this price can easily land between $4,200 and $4,500 once you include the loan, taxes, insurance, and upkeep. Suddenly, about half of the take-home pay is gone before life even begins. What's left has to cover everything else. 2 cars can quietly eat $1,000 a month between payments. Insurance and fuel. Food for a household that isn't cutting corners can run $700 or more. Utilities, phones, internet, another $400. Student loans, health costs, and basic subscriptions finish the job. By the end of the month, there may still be money left, but not margin, not flexibility, not enough to absorb surprises without stress. And this is a household that, by most standards, is doing well. That's the uncomfortable reality. The problem isn't reckless spending. It's that good income hasn't kept pace with what ownership demands. When nearly every dollar has an assignment, the house stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like pressure. And this is where people realize something unsettling. Earning more doesn't automatically make a stretch decision safe. Being house poor doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in quietly. The first few months feel manageable. You're careful, you adjust. You tell yourself this is just the transition period and things will smooth out soon. Then real life starts asking for money. It begins with small decisions. You check your account before buying groceries. You delay replacing worn tires because the mortgage already cleared this week. You skip plans not because you're busy, but because spending feels irresponsible now. None of this feels dramatic. It just feels tight. Over time, that tightness becomes constant. A repair that costs $2,000 isn't an inconvenience. It's a crisis. A medical bill doesn't get paid. It gets floated. A dip in income, even temporary, forces uncomfortable choices. The house becomes the reference point for every decision. Can we still make the payment? The hardest part isn't the numbers. It's the mental load. You carry it everywhere, at work, at home, on weekends. You're living inside a budget that leaves no room to breathe, and the thing that's supposed to make you feel secure is the source of the anxiety. People don't talk about this stage because it doesn't look like failure from the outside. You own a home. You did what you were supposed to do. But inside, the pressure builds. The joy fades. And the idea of building equity feels abstract compared to the very real stress of making it through the month. This is the cost no listing mentions. There comes a point when the smartest move isn't pushing harder. It's stepping back. Not because you failed, but because you finally see the situation clearly. Choosing stability doesn't look impressive. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't earn compliments at dinner parties. But it does something far more important. It gives you control. Stability means your housing cost leaves room in your life. Room to save, room to handle a surprise without panic. Room to say yes to things that matter without doing mental gymnastics afterward. It means your paycheck isn't already spoken for before it arrives. For some people, that choice looks like renting longer and investing the difference. For others, it means buying something smaller, farther out, or less polished. Sometimes it means accepting that ownership in a certain market just doesn't make sense right now and refusing to treat that as a personal failure. Pressure tells you to hurry. It tells you that if you don't buy now, you'll miss your chance. Stability asks a quieter question. Will this actually make my life better? That question changes everything. It shifts the goal from owning at all costs to living well. It replaces urgency with intention. And it reminds you that financial decisions don't exist to impress other people. They exist to support the life you're trying to build. Walking away from a bad deal isn't quitting. It's choosing not to borrow stress from the future. Before you commit to a price tag, slow down and run your own math. Not the version designed to get a loan approved, but the one that reflects your real life. If your monthly take-home pay is $7,000 and housing would consume $3,500 or more, that leaves very little room for error. One repair, one medical bill, or one missed paycheck can tip everything off balance. Ask yourself whether you can still save at least 10% of your income, handle a $2,000 surprise without panic, and live without checking your account before every purchase. If the answer is no, the house isn't affordable, no matter what anyone says. Owning a home should support your life, not control it. The real goal isn't a higher price point. It's financial breathing room,